In the heart of the Mongol Empire, where the wind howled across the endless steppe, one man ruled over more than land. He ruled over souls. Genghis Khan's court was both the cradle of power and the grave of innocence. Behind the walls of his tinted palaces, whispers spoke of beauty and terror entwined. What happened there blurred the line between devotion and domination, faith and fear. Stay until the end, and you'll see why history remembers his empire not only for conquest, but for what it demanded of those trapped within its golden shadows. The Khan's palace was not marble and stone, but silk and blood. His court shimmered with embroidered tents, golden dishes, and perfumed smoke. Yet beneath that luxury lay the harsh truth of empire. Loyalty enforced through terror, love molded into submission. Women brought from conquered lands stood silent, draped in jewels that weighed like chains. They were symbols, spoils, and sometimes spies. Their beauty was political, their smiles rehearsed. Within these walls, affection was currency, and survival depended not on strength, but on obedience to a ruler who could build nations or erase them overnight. Imagine the silence of those long Mongolian nights. Horses neighing in the distance, guards murmuring in Turkic tongues, and the faint weeping of someone unseen. The Khan's court was an empire of paradox, nomadic yet organized, savage yet sophisticated. His rule was lawless and absolute, yet guided by his own code, Yasa. This code dictated everything, from how his sons would inherit to how his wives would serve. Many historians believe these women, cloaked in silk and fear, understood more about diplomacy than his generals ever did. They were both prisoners and power brokers. Each wife came from conquest, a princess of China, a noble from Khwarezm, a beauty from the Persian plains. Marriages were treaties sealed with tears. Some of these women, like Börte, his first and most trusted wife, held real influence. She stood beside him when he was still Temujin, a hunted outcast. Her abduction and return forged his fury, shaping the ruthless man he would become. To him, Börte was both love and symbol, the proof that no humiliation would go unanswered. Through her, we see how personal pain could ignite an empire of vengeance. Others were not so fortunate. Captured princesses were paraded like offerings, stripped of their crowns, and given new names. Their old identities erased. Some chroniclers described the Khan's harems, not as places of pleasure, but as prisons of silence, guarded by women from conquered tribes who knew too well the price of defiance. Their voices were lost to history, but their presence shaped every alliance, every feud, every heir born beneath the Mongolian moon. To serve the Khan was to vanish into legend, and yet, even in disappearance, their influence endured through the sons they bore. The empire's breath stretched from Korea to Kiev, but its heart pulsed in those inner chambers. Here, diplomacy was whispered in the dark. The women of the Khan's court exchanged secrets, carried messages, and soothed rivalries. They were the invisible architects of power. Chroniclers wrote of feasts and blood, of celebrations that could end in executions. Music and terror mingled like smoke and incense. When the Khan raised his golden cup, no one knew if it meant favor or death. And behind him, his wives watched, serene, expressionless, yet knowing their slightest gesture could change history. Among these women was Kalan, said to have been the Khan's favorite after Börte. Her grace was legend, her intelligence whispered about even in enemy courts. She rode beside him in battle, armored in gold, defying the role of a mere consort. Some said her laughter could calm him, others believed it could condemn. Whether myth or truth, Kalan represented what so few women of that world could ever hold: the power to be both desired and respected. Yet even she was bound by the invisible rope of obedience. To love the Khan was to fear him. The Mongol worldview saw women as vessels of legacy, carriers of lineage. They bore sons who would one day rule fragments of a world-spanning empire. Yet behind the legend of power lay endless vulnerability. For every woman who rose beside the Khan, dozens disappeared unnamed, their stories swallowed by conquest. Their silence remains the truest record of that era. It was not the sword that kept them quiet, but the memory of what disobedience could bring. The Mongol Empire, historians note, was built on absolute loyalty, and nowhere was loyalty more fragile than in his court. The court's darkness was not all cruelty. Within it, a strange kind of order emerged. Genghis Khan granted certain women authority over trade, households, and even governance during campaigns. Some acted as stewards of entire regions. This paradox defined him, ruthless conqueror, yet capable of trust in those he deemed worthy. But this trust was conditional, fleeting. Any whisper of betrayal and loyalty turned to ash. Fear was the empire's mortar, holding together lands and hearts alike. And though these women stood behind silk curtains, they carried the burden of empire upon their trembling shoulders. Foreign envoys often marveled at what they saw. No king in Europe, they said, gave such prominence to women. Yet that prominence came at a price. These wives and concubines were tools of empire, sent as gifts, as peace offerings, as living treaties. When nations fell, their queens became symbols of submission. And yet, in the stillness of the steppe, beneath the eternal sky, their stories merged into something almost sacred. For through them, the blood of nations flowed, uniting east and west, conqueror and conquered, in one vast and terrible tapestry of destiny. The Mongol court's moral landscape confounded outsiders. To the Persians, it was barbaric; to the Chinese, unpredictable; to Europeans, almost demonic. But to the Mongols themselves, it was divine order. Every union, every punishment, every decree an extension of heaven's will. The Khan believed he ruled by destiny, chosen by the eternal blue sky. Within that belief, even his cruelties found justification. The women of his court were not equals, yet neither were they irrelevant. They embodied the spirit of conquest, submission turned into statecraft, survival transformed into power. History's silence about them is deafening. Yet whispers persisted, of jealousies that ended in poison, of rival consorts whose glances meant death. Chroniclers from Persia and Russia spoke of the inner court as a battlefield of its own, fought not with blades, but with glances, words, and secrets. Servants vanished, officials fell out of favor, and new queens rose overnight. To outsiders, this was chaos. To the Khan, it was natural order, the weak devoured by the strong, even within his own tent. Such was the world he created, where conquest never ceased, even in the quiet between wars. It's easy to demonize the man, yet in his story lies something deeply human: the endless hunger for control, the fear of betrayal, the illusion of divine purpose. Genghis Khan was not born cruel. He was forged by betrayal, exile, and loss. Every act of dominance in his court reflected the insecurity of a man who once had nothing. Every law he imposed stemmed from chaos he once suffered. His empire mirrored his soul, magnificent, restless, merciless. To understand his court is to glimpse the heart of empire itself, pulsing with glory and guilt. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the steppe fell silent. His wives and daughters mourned, some sincerely, others out of duty. His empire shattered into shards of inheritance, each ruled by a son born from those same trembling hands that once poured his wine. These women, once shadows behind a curtain, became regents, rulers, and power brokers. Some governed vast territories in his name. Yet, even then, their lives were haunted by the memory of one man's shadow, the eternal conqueror whose ghost seemed to watch every decision from beyond the grave. Centuries later, historians still debate the nature of his household. Was it driven by cruelty or by cultural law? Was it monstrous or simply the logic of its time? The Mongol court remains both fascinating and horrifying, a world where empire was birthed in the clash of flesh and ambition. And though the tents are long gone, the echoes remain. The ghosts of those who served, suffered, and ruled beside him linger in the dust of the steppe, whispering stories too dangerous for parchment, too intimate for history's pen. Even now, Genghis Khan's descendants carry the weight of that legacy. Modern Mongolia remembers him as a hero, a unifier, a visionary. The West remembers him as a destroyer. But between those extremes lies the truth: he was both. His court, for all its terror, gave rise to trade, communication, and cultural blending unseen in its time. The Silk Road flourished beneath his watch, connecting civilizations that had never before spoken. Yet, At its center stood a man who ruled not just with armies, but with the unspoken obedience of those closest to him. Power, at its core, always demands sacrifice. For the Mongol women, that sacrifice was their freedom. Yet from that bondage emerged a strange strength, the ability to influence an empire from behind the veil. Some historians suggest that without these women, Genghis's empire would have crumbled within a decade. They managed households, advised generals, preserved unity. They were the unseen spine of history's fiercest conqueror. It is ironic, perhaps, that those erased from the chronicles were the very ones holding the empire together. In silence, they found immortality. Today, archaeologists unearth fragments, jewels, tools, and bones that once belonged to those forgotten queens. Each discovery feels like a whisper from the past, a plea to remember. For every monument to conquest, there should stand a monument to endurance. The Mongol court was not merely the seat of a conqueror. It was a crucible of humanity's contradictions. Passion and cruelty, love and terror, destiny and despair. The empire may have been built by men, but it was sustained by women who learned to navigate the impossible. And so, when we speak of Genghis Khan, the warrior, the legend, the destroyer, we must also speak of the world he ruled behind the veil. The one built from quiet resilience, from whispered strategies and unspoken grief. There, amid the gold and the smoke, lived women whose names history forgot, but whose choices still ripple through centuries. Their story is not one of romance or submission, but survival. They were both captives and queens, shaping history from the shadows of power. History often glorifies the conqueror, not the conquered. Yet sometimes, the truest stories lie in the quiet places, behind silk curtains, in whispered prayers, in eyes that dared not meet the throne. The Mongol court remains one of history's darkest mirrors, reflecting the best and worst of humanity's hunger for control. If this story moved you, give this video a like, subscribe for more forgotten truths of empires past, and join us next time as we uncover another world history tried to bury, a world of power, silence, and survival.